the shortest possible introduction to conclusion regarding Duran's stance.
The conclusion regarding Duran's stance in 1963 to 1964 states the following.
Sylvia Duran, the receptionist of the Cuban consulate, decided that not commit perjury after November 22nd and for the years 1963 to 1964. This was the only rational and self-serving strategy which she had at her disposal.
From the above conclusion, a series of implications arise. Note that all of the following require proof. We will see later how they are proven. The interpretation of the conclusion and its implications are as follows. Duran was recruited by the CIA as an asset, obviously with payment, to frame Oswald. It is obvious that Duran had the impression that she was participating in some kind of anti-Castro operation. Duran participated in the operation under her own name and involved her family in the operation as well. It is obvious that under no circumstances was she participating in an operation to assassinate the president. No reasonable person, let alone a mother, would participate in an operation to assassinate the President of the United States using their real name. It is characteristic that all the other CIA assets and agents who participated in the operation did so under pseudonyms. So, when on November 22, 1963, Duran saw on television that Oswald was accused of the president's murder, she must have been in a state of panic. There was a real danger that she could end up in the electric chair. It is obvious that she contacted a lawyer. It is obvious that the lawyer would have told her that the only rational strategy she could follow to avoid the electric chair would be to tell the absolute truth. That she participated in a CIA operation that framed Oswald with the aim of undermining Castro's regime and had no idea about President's assassination. This was the only rational strategy available to Duran. What causes confusion is the fact that we, in hindsight, know that the cover-up ultimately succeeded and that the cover-up involved Johnson, Warren, Hoover, Dean Rusk, etc. But Duran did not know these things. She neither knew nor cared about exactly what happened with the CIA Oswald Project. The real name of the operation was Helms-Angleton Project. Nor could anyone convince her. The Helms-Angleton Project was approved on April 15th, on April 17th by Dean Rusk, and on May 1st, 1963, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Her handlers, obviously at some level her handler was David Atlee Phillips, had clearly lost all credibility. She had to follow her own self-serving strategy to survive. Obviously, there was communication between Duran and the CIA in the presence of Duran's lawyer, probably on the evening of November 22, 1963. There, an agreement was obviously reached between the CIA and Duran, according to which Duran would not appear spontaneously before the investigative authorities and the press to make revelations, and at the same time, Duran would under no circumstances commit perjury. We should note here that the CIA had received an order from the Joint Chiefs of Staff as early as May 1, 1963, to orchestrate a false flag operation framing Cuba. One conclusion from the conclusion regarding Duran's stance and the related facts is that the CIA was about to carry out a false flag fake assassination attempt against the president. Personally, if I heard such a scenario, I would say, "You're crazy." These things don't happen, and yet, from a CIA document we know that a false flag fake assassination attempt operation as a realistic possibility was promoted by Desmond Fitzgerald, chief of CIA/SAS, Cuba operations, as early as 1960. In the document, he asks for the details of implementing such an operation to be studied. And furthermore, we know that on September 7, 1963, Castro threatened Kennedy with symmetric retaliation for the assassination attempts against him. This statement provided the political context for implementing a false flag fake assassination operation. A key conclusion that emerges from the conclusion regarding Sylvia Duran's stance in 1963 to 1964 is that the Helms-Angleton Project was hijacked. Hijacking the Helms-Angleton Project was far easier than it might appear. It could involve something as simple as leaking the details of the plan to the mafia. Another conclusion implied by the conclusion regarding Duran's stance is that the CIA used an Oswald imposter in Mexico. Of course, this sounds surreal and crazy. But from the testimony of Robert Mayhew, it clearly emerges that in 1958, they had used an imposter in a CIA operation. Therefore, the use of an imposter was one of the CIA's methods. Also, the first one to mention an imposter in Mexico was Hoover in a report to Johnson. The above presentation of the conclusion regarding Duran's stance in 1963 to 1964 appears compelling, but how can its validity be proven? We need a proof. The proof is based on two groups of incidents. The first group concerns three very critical incidents about which no questions were asked during the Duran interrogations. We will call this group Group 1. The second group of incidents concerns the actions of the American government to prevent any American investigator and lawyer who was not a CIA agent from coming into any contact with Duran. We will call this group Group 2. It is very important that the incidents in these two groups occurred in an outrageous way that is unique in the history of criminology. Let's now examine Group 1, which focuses on the deliberate avoidance of collecting statements and posing critical questions during Duran's interrogations. No Mexican or American investigator or lawyer took a statement from Duran about the following incidents. 1. The incident of September 28th. 2. The incident of September 18th. 3. Oswald's presence at a party hosted by the Durans in September 1963, according to the testimony of Elena Guerrero, Mexico's most important female writer. Now let's look at Group 2, which concerns the American state's blocking of American lawyers or investigators who were not CIA agents from contacting Duran. 1. On November 23rd, Tom Karamessines tried to prevent Duran's arrest. 2. In April 1964, Le Tempo 8 prohibited the lawyers of the Warren Commission from coming into contact with Duran. 3. In 1964, Earl Warren prohibited the lawyers of the Warren Commission, Slauson and Coleman, from coming into contact with Duran. 4. On November 27, 1963, Helms ordered Win Scott, chief of the CIA station in Mexico, to prohibit any Americans to confront Sylvia Duran or be in contact with her. 5. On November 28, 1963, the CIA prevented FBI Special Agent Kennan from coming into contact with key witness Alvarado, and therefore indirectly with Duran. The above events occurred in an outrageous way. Let's look again at Group 1. 1. Incident of September 28th. On November 23rd, the President of Mexico summoned the chief of CIA station Win Scott to his office and informed him that the Mexican security authorities had evidence that Oswald entered the Mexican consulate on Saturday, September 28th, outside public hours, and in the presence of Sylvia Duran, contacted the Soviet embassy. Duran's first interrogation by the Mexican authorities began 3 to 4 hours after the meeting between the president and Win Scott. In the interrogation report, which was conducted by Mexican Le Tempo 4, there is not the slightest question about the incident of September 28th. Note that the interrogation ended the next day, and violence was allegedly used against Duran. 2. Incident of September 18th. According to the statement on November 26th of the key witness Nicaraguan Alvarado, on September 18th, a group of people inside the Cuban consulate bribed Oswald to carry out an assassination. Duran, who was at the consulate that day, was interrogated for the second time by Le Tempo 4 on November 28th. In the interrogation report, there is not the slightest question about the incident of September 18th. The outrageous fact is that the American ambassador Thomas Mann requested that the interrogator break and crack Duran regarding the incident of September 18th. In addition, 2 FBI documents stated that Duran was the only eyewitness they had for the incident of September 18th, and that they hoped for an interrogation confronting Duran with Alvarado. Even more outrageous is that the CIA handed Alvarado over to Le Tempo 4 on November 28th. That is, when Le Tempo 4 was interrogating Duran, he had Alvarado in an adjacent room. And even more outrageous is that Le Tempo 4 asked a question related to one of the characters indicated by Alvarado, about a black man with red hair. Le Tempo 4 asked Duran if there was an employee at the consulate who was black with red hair. Duran said of course not, but Alvarado never indicated the black man with red hair as an employee of the consulate. Latempo 4 avoided asking the question, "Did you ever see a black man with red hair at the consulate in September 1963? 3. Oswald's presence at a party hosted by the Durans. Elena Garrow went to the Duran's party with 3 relatives who confirmed Oswald's presence at the party. Garrow was the cousin of Duran's husband. Nevertheless, the FBI team in Mexico did not spend 5 minutes to take a statement from Sylvia Duran. The U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Thomas Mann, whom President Johnson promoted to Undersecretary of State in 1965, stated to the HSCA that Sylvia Duran was a CIA agent, and the American government stopped the investigation in Mexico City because it would result in the revelation of a CIA covert operation. Mann requested immunity from the president to give sworn testimony.
A different perspective on conclusion regarding Duran's stance.
In the first group of incidents, there are 3 reported contacts between Duran and Oswald that were abnormal. The contacts between Duran and Oswald are considered normal when Duran, the receptionist at the Cuban consulate, met with him in her professional capacity during public hours. That is, the normal contacts were those that took place on September 27, 1963. All other reported contacts cannot be considered normal. What is unprecedented in the history of criminology is that the investigative authorities asked absolutely no questions about these 3 abnormal contacts. In other words, Duran was not asked a single question about 100% of the abnormal reported contacts. Moreover, the manner in which the omission to obtain statements from Duran about these 3 abnormal contacts occurred was truly outrageous. To truly understand how the lone gunman theory stands in relation to the conclusion regarding Duran's stance, we must examine specific details of the Alvarado case. In his testimony, Gilberto Alvarado stated, with great specificity, that he had contacted the American Embassy in Mexico to report the incident prior to November 22, 1963. Consequently, a thorough CIA report to Earl Warren should have included 2 essential lines of inquiry. 1. Sylvia Duran's statement regarding the incident on September 18, 1963. 2. Investigative findings based on interrogations of the American Embassy's telephone switchboard employees. However, the CIA report to the Warren Commission contained no reference to either. This is critical because the Commission's conclusion on the Alvarado case relied exclusively on the CIA's findings. Any diligent investigator would have rejected such an incomplete report, demanding it be resubmitted with statements from Duran and the switchboard operators. Yet, Earl Warren not only accepted the report, but also prevented Commission lawyers Slauson and Coleman from contacting Duran. The omission is so glaring that it suggests prior coordination between Earl Warren and the CIA. No rational actor would submit a report completely devoid of these 2 vital fields of inquiry without assurance that it would be accepted. Reflecting on Ambassador Mann's evolving stance reveals a significant contradiction. 1. In November 1963, Mann believed Gilberto Alvarado's claims described genuine actions by the Cubans and that Sylvia Duran was an agent of the Cuban DGI. 2. Upon assuming leadership, it is virtually certain that Mann learned the truth shortly after taking his post at the State Department. 3. In 1978, Mann reversed his position, stating his belief that Alvarado had described a CIA covert action and that Duran was actually a CIA agent. Clearly, Mann's perspective on the Alvarado case shifted drastically after he began his tenure at the State Department. CIA cables indicate that the case was managed on the State Department side by Ural Alexis Johnson. Logic dictates that Mann would have consulted Johnson as early as December 1963, when Mann became Assistant Secretary of State and Special Assistant to the President. Given Mann's high rank, it is implausible that Johnson would have withheld the truth on the grounds of security or patriotism. Alexis Johnson certainly did not say, "You know what? You're not patriotic enough to tell you what happened." The argument gains further weight when we consider that in 1965, Mann was promoted to a position that placed him above Alexis Johnson in the chain of command. Consequently, Mann's 1978 testimony, where he claimed to be 99% certain this was a CIA operation, must be viewed through a legal lens. Bound by secrecy laws and denied the immunity he requested, Mann could not legally admit to 100% certainty without exposing classified information. Note: it is also significant that, in his capacity as special assistant to the president, Mann handled one sensitive matter related to the JFK assassination in 1964. David Atlee Phillips was the CIA agent who conducted Alvarado's interview for the CIA. He was a wizard of disinformation. He was literally decorated by the CIA for toppling Guatemala's President Arbenz through a disinformation campaign. The video doesn't allow enough time to demonstrate this, but it can be proven with complete certainty that Alvarado accused Duran of playing a leading role in the September 18, 1963 incident, not merely acting as a receptionist. Phillips, however, drafted a false report of Alvarado's testimony, casting her as merely the receptionist during the episode. David Phillips most likely organized the September 18th operation and then took Alvarado's statement about it. The fact that they sent Alvarado to Le Tempo 4 to use threats of violence in order to force him to retract his testimony was confirmed not only by Thomas Mann, but also by FBI Special Agent Keenan in his testimony to the Church Committee. We recall that Keenan arrived in Mexico City on the night of November 27th under orders to take a statement from Alvarado. From the morning of November 28th, he was asking to see Alvarado, who, until midday on November 28th, was in a CIA safe house. The CIA forbade Keenan from having any contact whatsoever with Alvarado. We will now examine Gerald Posner's book, Case Closed. Posner's account of Alvarado's statement to the CIA is quite brief, with his full analysis of the case spanning only 9 lines. The only substantive thing this text says is that the CIA sent a CIA agent using the pseudonym Peter Woodhead to conduct a polygraph interrogation. First of all, it must be stated that the conclusion regarding Duran's stance in 1963 to 1964 is fundamentally separate from any statements made by Alvarado or even Duran herself. This conclusion rests solely on the actions of Le Tempo 4 during Duran's questioning and the concerted efforts of the CIA and its assets to prevent any communication between Duran and American investigators and lawyers. Woodhead made sure his report was deliberately vague, only sharing his final conclusions. This kept him safe. Even if Alvarado's statement turned out to be right later, Woodhead had an easy escape route. He could just say the method was flawed to begin with, or claim that Le Tempo 4's threats to hang him by his testicles had put so much psychological pressure on Alvarado that it messed up the result. He could simply say, "Well, that was my subjective assessment. It seems that Le Tempo 4 stressed him out psychologically. That is why the method failed." Of course, manipulating a polygraph interrogation by the polygraph handler is something trivial if the handler wants to do it. It's done as follows. 1. In the pre-test interview, the examiner designs weak, non-threatening control questions and signals they are unimportant, so the subject feels little anxiety when answering them. 2. The examiner then frames the relevant crime questions with great drama and suspicion, making them psychologically far more threatening than the control questions. 3. As a result, the subject's stronger physiological reactions to the relevant questions, created by the examiner's own framing, are recorded and then labeled as deception indicated, effectively incriminating the subject. What is revealing is the destruction of the original 6 tapes and their duplicates containing Alvarado's polygraph session, which were sent to CIA and FBI headquarters. Since both sets are missing from the National Archives, it is impossible that their destruction was accidental. Given the gravity of the JFK assassination case, the most important criminal case in U.S. history, it appears Peter Woodhead likely demanded the destruction of both sets of recordings as a minimum self-protection measure before accepting the assignment. This preemptive action was necessary in light of the high probability that the case could have quickly spiraled out of control in December 1963. This act clearly constitutes a spoliation of evidence. What we saw was basically institutional sociopathy, a total refusal to even pretend to follow the law or due process. In essence, the agency's message was this: we'll send a mid-level guy with a fake name, give you one completely useless piece of paper, and honestly, that's more than you deserve. If you don't like it, tough luck. This is not mere arrogance. It is the deliberate, contemptuous dismantling of the rule of law. The willingness to excuse, rationalize, and even celebrate this behavior is the real pathology, because it teaches the public that contempt for due process is acceptable as long as it comes wrapped in a government seal. That is how republics die, not with a coup, but with a shrug from people who should know better.
Sylvia Duran had sexual intercourse with Lee Harvey Oswald on several occasions. CIA, June 13, 1967.
I would like to emphasize that the evidence for Alvarado's truthfulness is not limited to the conclusion regarding Duran's stance. In my book, I present 6 independent proofs. The conclusion regarding Duran's stance is merely proof number 4. The book is deliberately titled JFK Assassination: 3 Theorems, 3 Mathematical Proofs. My proofs possess true mathematical rigor. Consequently, they are difficult to present in a video format without becoming overly monotonous. Here, I will present a few intermediate conclusions regarding the alleged intimate relationship between Oswald and Duran. These conclusions form the foundation for proof number 5, which is entirely independent of the proof derived from the conclusion regarding Duran's stance, that is, proof number 4. In other words, proof number 4 is closely related to the conclusion regarding Duran's stance, and proof number 5 is closely related on the conclusion regarding the intimate relationship between Oswald and Duran. The book's table of contents outlines 6 independent proofs, verifying the veracity of Alvarado's testimony. It further details the intermediate conclusions necessary for the 5th proof, a mathematically rigorous demonstration that the pretty girl mentioned in Alvarado's statement was indeed Sylvia Duran, confirming the testimony as 100% factual. The 5th proof is too complex to cover here. However, it leads to a fascinating conclusion regarding one of the CIA's disinformation methods. Let's look at some key facts that emerge along the way as we build the case. 1. The CIA carried out a disinformation operation using intentionally deceptive documents with the aim of eliminating Alvarado's claim that Duran played a leading role in the incident of September 18th. 2. The Mexican police had reliable information about an intimate incident between Duran and Oswald. 3. In 1963 to 1964, the CIA carried out a disinformation operation by suppressing DFS information, omitting from documents and reports any mention of Duran's intimate incident with Oswald. 4. Conversely, in 1967, the CIA reversed this tactic with a disinformation operation using intentionally deceptive documents to promote the claim that Oswald and Duran had sexual intercourse on several occasions after September 27th. 5. In stark contrast to the CIA's disinformation maneuvers, suppressing a supposed intimate incident in 1963 to 1964, only to amplify claims of repeated intercourse post-September 27th in 1967, the events between September 27th and October 1st, 1963, confirm that Duran and Oswald had absolutely no intimate relations. The above 5 points together constitute the conclusion regarding the intimate relationship between Oswald and Duran. The whole thing plays out like a classic bedroom farce penned by Georges Feydeau himself. I would like the viewer to pause for a moment and reflect on just how outrageous the 5 points I have presented truly are. Consider that every detail I analyze comes exclusively from CIA documents. I rely on no witness testimony whatsoever. In 1967, the very year that New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison launched his investigation into the Kennedy assassination, the CIA indirectly incorporated into the case file the suggestion that Oswald had engaged in multiple sexual encounters with Sylvia Duran. Let's recall that Oswald arrived in Mexico City at 10 a.m. on September 27, 1963, after a grueling 20-hour bus journey. He immediately went to the Cuban consulate, where he had a heated argument with the consul. The next day, he suffered a nervous breakdown inside the Soviet embassy.
Yet the CIA orchestrated a disinformation operation, one in which Duran herself participated, despite being a married woman with a child, to promote the notion that on Sunday, September 29th, she had multiple sexual encounters with a man who was essentially a complete stranger to her. But why does it feel so farcical? Well, naturally, it's all because the CIA had to somehow reconcile three completely incompatible plot points. 1. That intimate incident between Sylvia Duran and the Oswald imposter on September 18th, which, because it was part of the framing setup, was staged deliberately in front of witnesses. 2. The urgent need to bury any evidence of Duran's contact with Oswald beyond September 27th. 3. The absolute necessity of pretending the Oswald imposter never existed at all. They had to square the circle without the whole thing collapsing to a bedroom farce. Here we are faced with a preemptive disinformation operation by the CIA in anticipation of developments in 1967, aimed at managing the problem posed by the existence of witnesses to the intimate incidents between the Oswald imposter and Sylvia Duran. Beyond Jim Garrison, they also had to deal with the ever-reliable and well-informed Elena Garro, as well as the American diplomat Charles Thomas. There were additional problems on this issue that are difficult to present here. The CIA wanted to establish that the real Oswald was indeed the person the witnesses saw in an intimate incident with Duran, and not the imposter. If the witnesses were to come forward and report that they had seen an intimate incident between Oswald and Duran, the CIA would gaslight them by claiming that the incident did indeed occur, but that the witnesses had misremembered the date, and that it actually took place between September 28th and October 1st. Their solution was to inject the absurd theory of a sexual relationship between Oswald and Duran into government records. They did this as part of a method I am calling case close. In this approach, logic, analytical thinking, and reasonable inferences simply do not matter. The case closed method is straightforward. Create a CIA report with constructed false content. Channel it beyond CIA boundaries, typically to the FBI, disseminating a misleading official document, and then, case closed. The establishment now has the pretext it needed. Journalists and the establishment would then follow suit, declaring, "There is the answer. Case closed. Nothing more to see. Anyone who questions this is a conspiracy theorist." We witnessed this farce in full swing with the sham CIA document cooked up by its agent hiding behind the pseudonym Peter Woodhead. For Earl Warren, this flimsy report was all it took to slam the case closed. In essence, the establishment was telling the CIA, "Produce any piece of paper. It doesn't matter what it says. We need any pretext, no matter how ridiculous, to close the case." Behind this disinformation operation lies the establishment's arrogant conviction that they can shove any damn lie down the throat of the American people and get away with it. It doesn't matter to them how batshit insane, how blatantly contradictory, or how utterly ridiculous the scenario they're peddling is. They'll push it anyway, because in their minds, the conformists will support it. And now the only thing left for you to track down is the conclusion regarding Tippett's murder, the adjacent conclusion to the conclusion regarding Duran's stance. The conclusion regarding Duran's stance holds the complete solution to the Tippett murder enigma. The moment you see the solution, it will change the way you see the world. And then the world will change.